Welcome to the Geek Girls Story Salon, where I talk to creatives from across disciplines and across the world about the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone, lifelong storyteller and head geek in charge. Today, I'm talking with an author who is really, really good at freaking you out. His novels, The Ghost Eaters, Whisper Down the Lane, and the forthcoming What Kind of Mother are creep fests with a touch of Southern Gothic. He's also brought his mad genius to the Venomverse, Absolute Carnage, also Avengers, Amazing Spider-Man, Captain Marvel. I'd be here all day if I tried to list it all. And then he's got his traveling show. He's so prolific it almost makes me mad, but he's such a nice dude and he makes a darn good apple pie, so I can't really be mad. Welcome to the show, Clay McLeod Chapman.
Hey, that's a wonderful intro. Thank you. I almost forgot about the pie. That was such a lovely little moment. My first and maybe last apple pie.
Well, it was delicious. So, and now the world knows.
There you go.
So to explain about the pie, we met very briefly at an appearance that you did in the Doylestown Bookshop with Chuck Wendig, and you brought that delicious apple pie to celebrate his book, Black River Orchard.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to ask him to write a book about pecans for the next appearance that you guys do together.
I'll take requests happily.
All right, cool. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'm going to ask. He may not do it, but I'm going to ask.
Worth a shot.
So you are really prolific. And I think that's fantastic because that's not the case for everybody. Is it because you're incredibly disciplined or are you just insane?
maybe a little bit of both. The discipline is, I feel like that's something that's come with time. And writing's a muscle. You gotta exercise it. And I find that, every morning I wake up and I sit here and this is, it's my imagination's treadmill.
Got it. It's, the more you do it, the more you do it.
Yeah. But I think to do it, you have to be a little insane. Like there has to be a little madness to it, because otherwise, why would you be in an attic kind of talking to yourself, like having all the characters speaking?
And the genre absolutely doesn't seem to matter.
Oh, are you talking specifically for me, or
no, just insanity in general. It doesn't matter if you're a romance writer or a horror writer or a comedy writer. Like there is this thread of insanity that kind of runs through all of it.
Follow that muse, wherever they go.
Mm-hmm. So I've already pre-ordered What Kind of Mother. But can you give us the pitch for those who haven't met you yet?
Oh man, okay. I have to learn how to talk about this because it's still so new. What Kind of Mother is ultimately, it is a Southern Gothic folk horror novel. The way that the elevator pitch for it is that it's imagine like a Nicholas Sparks novel just going right off the rails. There's a young woman, single mother, trying really hard to kind of make ends meet and support her child, her teenage daughter. And she's kind of returned to her southern coastal Chesapeake Bay home. Mm-hmm. And the way that she's making ends meet is by kind of telling fortunes, like reading palms and, kind of professing to be a palm reader, which may or may not be true. But she reconnects with someone from her past, an old flame from the neighborhood. And it just so happens that this gentleman he has a son who has been missing for 5 years. And still believes with all of his heart and mind and soul and body that his son is somewhere out there still. And when these two people reconnect, she has some sort of epiphany, some sort of otherworldly, maybe supernatural, maybe psychic connection to this man and his son. and it leads them both down a very twisted, convoluted, and dark path that only gets darker and darker as things progress.
You dark?
Just a little, just a little.
Okay, but so there is this bit of a theme in your novels, at least the ones that I've that I've acquainted myself with, of grief and regret and guilt. Because What Kind of Mother has that at the center of it, and Ghost Eaters has that, and
Yeah.
Whisper Down the Lane is even that's sort of a piece of that kind of thing. So my question is, do you think of the processing of grief and guilt as like a big driver in your need to tell stories?
For now, yes, very much so. And particularly with What Kind of Mother and Ghost Eaters. And you're right with Whisper Down the Lane as well, which was the novel prior to Ghost Eaters. And I think if you like take those three books, for me, beginning with Whisper Down the Lane, like I started to ask myself, like, I have this wonderful opportunity to write and tell stories, and the faith and support of a publisher who wants to kind of put these stories out there. And they had to be spooky books, they had to be scary. And I previous publishing efforts and endeavors had always been about what I felt kind of scared other people. But the kind of transition to beginning with Whisper Down the Lane was like I started asking myself, well, what scares me? What scares? What am I afraid of personally? And kind of using these books and these stories that I'm telling as a way to kind of express those fears. And as a parent, as someone who has a little more skin in the game, the older I've gotten, there's a lot more to be afraid of. And I think grief and loss, and even just the kind of like the risk of losing, your loved ones is such a daily kind of, I don't know, like I don't want to talk about my kids for the whole podcast, but there is something to be said about, you send your children out into this world, and it's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
So I don't know how long I can ride that ride before I just run my nerves ragged.
Mhm.
But it is led through these last three books, and I'm working on a new one right now, and it's definitely, it's there, it's in me. And then you lose people in your life, you lose family members, you lose friends, and the kind of complexity of your day to day kind of seeps into the writing.
Mhm.
At least
And
for me.
and yeah, and horror seems like the best playground to do that and build that little sandcastle in.
I think so. I mean, God, I can think of some amazing books that deal specifically with grief and kind of losing a loved one. Like, I mean,
Mm.
most recently, there's this amazing novel called This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. It's a
Mhm.
beautiful, terrifying book. The Fisherman by John Langan. Like, I mean, like, I could spend, like, it's amazing how many books deal with the loss of a loved one, and they are scary, terrifying books. I love it. Love it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting too. Like, there was also a Netflix series, Midnight Mass. It was a Mike
Oh,
Flanagan. If you want to
yes.
talk about character-driven horror, which is what I consider your books for sure.
God, I have been a fan, like the rest of the world. His series have been kind of fundamental. Like they've been wonderful. Like Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor.
Mhm.
I mean, his series in particular, like being able to kind of crack open the format and just continue to tell a story, and not be hindered by a feature film time length. And I don't know, the sprawl seems to do him
Mm.
well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting because I think of that and I think of your books, and it's a similar sort of, you take a minute to sink in and let us get to know the characters before things really start to get weird.
That's great. I love that because I mean, I do think that the best horror, the most terrifying horror, whether it's a book or a novel, film, TV, is when you actually feel like you know who these characters are, like before you put them in peril, before before the threat and imposes itself. You want to kind of know the world that you are living in, and you want to know the people that inhabit that world, and that just takes a little bit of time. You gotta warm up to these people, because otherwise it's kind of like one of those, it's like a Friday the 13th. And as much as I love those movies, the kind of interchangeability or the kind of disposability of the
Right,
characters.
right, right,
Oh, you're the gawky one, and you're the attractive one, and
right.
you're
And
the
you're the
jock.
final girl.
Exactly. Like, you know, you just want to muddy those characters up a little bit so that you
Yeah,
can see them in all their complexity and dimensionality.
right. Well, and that's why I call it character driven horror, because what makes it scary, I mean, at some point it just escalates to the point where it's just scary on its own merits. Like, oh my God, like my son saw me finishing the last 25 pages or so of Ghost Eaters, and he's like, wow, are you okay?
That's amazing.
Yeah. But like the pull of what scares you is so much dependent on who the people are, and their guilt and regret and pain and fear and whatever else. So yeah, so I definitely, that's worlds away from the Friday the 13th. And you're I'm assuming an 80s kid also. I think we're fairly close in
I'm
age, so
born in the 70s, raised in
yeah.
the 80s.
Yeah, yeah, same. So it's we all have memories of those goofy movies, but yeah.
And those movies are catnip to me. Like I
Yeah.
I will watch those films. They're on heavy rotation here in my household, and I think that's another kind of wonderful facet about horror as an umbrella. There's a lot, and there's a lot of different flavors and a lot of different varieties for all kinds of tastes. And most nights it's kind of like, what do I want to imbibe this evening? Oh, I'm gonna go for Jason. Or what do I want tonight? I think I want something a little bit more refined, and I'm gonna put in
Yeah.
my plan again.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, like the Flash, like I grew up in the 80s, so of course, like, the slasher movies are kind of part of my consciousness, but for sure it's like, if somebody's head is getting cut off and their blood is splattering all over the wall, like I want to know whose head it is and why their blood is splattering that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You'd be like, wait, what character's head is that again?
Right.
Oh, the
Right.
jock. That's right.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, that's why I tend to kind of gravitate to the stuff that's more character driven. Um, so you've also done quite a lot in the world of comics. Do you have a favorite out of the various properties that you've gotten to put your hands on?
Oh, you're gonna make me pick my favorites. I've been really fortunate to work with Marvel,
Mm.
which is great. And I've kind of ended up in the symbiote sandbox for the most part, at least recently. Um,
Hmm.
and one of my favorite characters, you mentioned the Absolute Carnage series.
Mm.
That was a lot of fun.
Mm.
Um, but there's this one particular character named Scream,
Mm.
who, if you're to kind of follow a family tree, there's Venom, and Scream is kind of an offshoot of Venom, kind of like the daughter of Venom, I guess. You could maybe say.
Okay.
Um, and I did an ongoing series for that character, which was a lot of fun. Um, and I've also written a few creator-owned projects. Like I did this lovely project with a company called Boom Studios
Mm.
called Lazaretto. And
Mm.
Lazaretto was another kind of personal favorite of mine. It's a little old now, but I still kind of think back to it fondly. If you're ever looking for a spooky comic, I would
Okay.
recommend.
Okay. Well, speaking of spooky comics, one of my favorite comics, new comics in the last few years has been the Harrow County series.
Yes, yes.
And I'm actually very excited. I'm going to be talking to Cullen Bunn in a few weeks.
See, that's amazing. I mean, he's phenomenal. I feel like I want to grow up to be Cullen Bunn.
Well,
I
he's another Venomverse alum like you. So
Yeah, yeah. He's right now he's actually doing. Oh my God, he's doing. I think his series is called The Death of Venomverse. Um, I was a part of the Edge of
right,
Venomverse, so
right.
in essence, it was kind of team Cullen up to kill it all. So he's destroying everything we've
You
built.
you were the warm up act.
Yeah, yeah. Which I will happily be. I mean, Cullen is like, I mean, he's Guns N' Roses to my White Lion, maybe. I don't know what
Oh my
I
God.
you know,
Wow, you just like sucked me back to like 1987 for a second there. That was amazing.
who's the great opening act for Guns N' Roses? I'll be the long story short, I'll be Cullen's opening act gleefully, happily.
But it's fun because actually you guys are also both Southern, right? Like he's from Missouri or something, and like
Right.
I think he's from Missouri, and you
Yeah.
are what, Virginia or
Virginia. Yeah.
thereabouts? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I born and raised in the Blue Ridge. Love it. Yeah, I mean, like there is something to say about the South. It is our kind of flawed and faulty kind of like I don't know, like kind of a warts and all region, and I don't know, it's home. I love it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And it's fun because I'm not remotely from the South at all.
uh-huh.
I grew up on Long Island, surrounded by Italians and Jews, and I have none of that in my DNA, but
Yeah.
I really love I don't know, the particular unique bouquet of like Southern spooky stuff.
Yeah. The gentility of the narrative, the humidity of the
Right,
story.
right.
Um,
Like I read Harrow County, and then I immediately ran off and, read everything I could about Haints,
yeah.
and, learned about Haint Blue that you
Oh,
paint on the houses to keep the Haints out and stuff like that.
God, I could spend all day talking about Cullen and his amazing. What I love about him and his work is
Mhm.
that the idea his horror has such an idea behind it. Like conceptually,
Mm,
there it goes beyond like a hook, but it's like his stories are so sharp and
mm,
focused that like I just love how I mean, God, like you talk about Harrow County, but like The Empty Man.
mhm,
Recently, he had one called Ghost Lore, which is
mm.
really great. Like, what are the ghost stories that ghosts tell? Like, that's amazing. Bone Parish. I mean, oh God, there was one called The Last Book You'll Ever Read, which is really
That's
fun.
a great title.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's in essence, I'm probably murdering this, but it's basically about a book that if you read it, you go mad.
Mm,
Um, and it kind of you lose your mind reading this book, but that only makes people want to read it. So,
of course, which is kind of genius.
yeah. Yeah, Cullen Bunn is phenomenal. I I would be so lucky to be considered the poor man's Cullen Bunn. Like it's just like he's I mean, he has such a body of work that you just want to get lost in it.
And I have on various occasions. Um, so but just to come back to this whole Southern flavor, like the South is definitely like really part of the DNA in your stuff. And I do see you like prodding a little bit at the sort of problematic elements of Southern history and culture. And I wonder if like, is that you consciously poking at it to process it for yourself, or is it just this is a part of the fabric of your world where you grew up and that's going to be reflected?
I would say probably a little bit of both. And I mean, there has to be a certain kind of level of culpability, or just at least kind of interrogation. Like
Mm,
I think that like, you know, the conflict for me, or the kind of like concern for me, is when it's just you look at this region and it's kind of foibles with rose tinted glasses, and it's not all rosy. But I think that like it is that kind of complexity that makes it kind of a rich territory to kind of mine
mm,
for its narratives, for its stories. And in my writing, when I'm kind of writing of the South or from the South or characters from the South, like it's, I mean, that these are questions that I feel like are very healthy, and doesn't ever kind of undermine or take away my love for the region. Like Virginia is my narrative default. Like I close
mhm.
my eyes and it's like, what story do I want to tell? And it just naturally, organically goes back home. You can take the boy out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the
That's
boy,
out of the book.
I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's funny because I don't know that I've ever written anything of consequence that was set on Long Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, my stories are all, they're like Europe or Mexico City, or they're like, I had like a blues thing that was like set basically was a tour. So they started, up and they were going down the coast and they went through the South and a lot of crazy things happened. Um, but yeah, I don't think I've ever said anything in the environment where I grew up, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I should say, and this is maybe me kind of challenging myself.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, I'm on a bit of a like a 20-year mental delay. So like
Hmm.
just now starting to write about adulthood. Like it's I think I'm like encroaching upon like people in their 20s and 30s. And
Mm.
like there's just this sense of like and before that it was like a lot of kids and a lot of teens, and um whatever the kind of emotional maturity of me and my writing, it just takes longer for me to get there. So like by my 50s, 60s, 70s, I'll be like 40s, like just kind of working up to it. But like right now, I'm just still processing all of that Virginia stuff, because that was the first 20 years of my life. And then just now, very recently, like I'm eking into, I live in Brooklyn, I'm here in New York, and like all of it, like every so often, like Brooklyn will kind of come into the fold, or New
Mhm.
York will come into the fold.
Mm.
And it feels very, it's like putting on a new pair of socks. Like they just feel a little too, like it just doesn't feel
Mm.
worn in yet. So I need to kind of like grow into my new, not new, my
Mm.
kind of home of the moment of the last 20 or so plus years.
Right. Right. Yeah. Actually, and that's funny you mentioned it. I have done New York City because I lived there for 13 years or something.
Oh yeah.
That was like comfort. That was comfortable for me to do. But yeah, I know like when you step outside of like something that you've really gotten comfortable in doing, it's always a little weird, a little awkward.
It
Uh,
feels strange, right? It's a little bit
yeah.
like this is I don't know. I mean, and maybe that's good. Like it is kind of good to kind of disrupt your whatever your default is.
Mhm.
And I do think that, you know, I could write short stories about the South till the cows come home.
Mhm.
And, I'm not, maybe that's not me challenging myself. Maybe to push forward, to kind of like forge into uncharted territory, I need to like write about write about this.
Yeah. 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 I don't know what it is. I think, and it's funny because like, like I have a foot in the world of like people who write fan fiction, and a lot of them will say, well, I like, these three relationships and this is all I write.
Yeah.
And the very thought of straying outside of them gets them really freaked out. They're like, I don't know how to do that.
It's scary. It's hard. And I've kind of said this in the past, and I think I still stand by it.
Mm,
Uh, I always I love musicians like Tom Waits. You
hmm
listen to a Tom Waits song, and that's a Tom Waits song. Like that is a distinct voice,
hmm
and he kind of explores and pushes the parameters of that voice, but it's always like a Tom Waits song.
hmm
Um, I just like to think in terms of writing as like, what is my song? Like what is my
hmm
voice? And maybe that's just telling stories that take place in Virginia, like as long as there's kind of more rocks to kind of, turn over and,
hmm
find the kind of dark squiggly things underneath, like
Yeah.
I'll keep writing about it.
So
Yeah,
do you do a lot of research?
I do. I
Mm,
mean, I think I do. I feel like I do. When in these kind of these novels I've been writing lately, um, it's fun. Research is where that's the kind of spelunking into your story. You're kind of exploring the parameters of what kind of where the story can exist. And I just yeah, that to me is more fun. And then the challenge is like, you have to kind of kill your darlings at a certain point where it's just like, oh, well, this, you know, it's when you get into the weeds of your research and all of a sudden like your book or your story suddenly has like,
hmm
like
Yep.
I don't necessarily need a chapter solely on kind of like the kind of nail head that was used back in
hmm Yep.
1955.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but I
Yep.
find that stuff so fascinating. Like that's the joy. Like, oh,
Right.
did you know? Did you know that like
hmm
yeah, that's
Yep.
I,
Yep.
I
I am
yeah.
absolutely like I am ADHD rabbit hole kind of researcher. And yeah, I'm like, okay, you know what? I want to write a book about Vikings because I want to read everything I can find about Vikings.
It's so much fun. And you just have to kind of wrestle it back, like
hmm
pins in and like like somehow take all of that and kind of insert it, kind of squeeze it, cram it into whatever your narrative structure is.
Right.
And
And it's
sometimes
hard.
it's about
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, like when I was working on the blues book, there was stuff that I had to cut, and it was like, all right, well, I understand this isn't really necessary, but look at all the cool stuff I learned.
That's when you need like either a director's cut or
Right,
annotations at the back to be like, for further reading,
right,
these
right,
are the deleted scenes. We need DVD,
right.
bonus features for our book.
Commentary, or yeah, like the book equivalent of that, of the director's commentary track.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's a really good idea. Somebody should do that. So just to kind of change directions for a minute. Recently, on the last show, I was chatting with Barb Morrison, who's this very punk rock record producer, worked with Debbie Harry, lived with the punk rock in the punk rock culture in New York in the 80s. And, they just released this memoir of that time in their life, and it was really interesting, and well done. And we were talking about it because most of it was written during quarantine. So we were talking about quarantine, and they confessed that during quarantine, they really latched onto those two albums released by Taylor Swift. And we sort of realized that a lot of people had like this comfort art, whatever it was. Maybe it was a show. For me, it was a Netflix show called Warrior Nun, but like something that they really fused with and really bonded to that kind of affected what creative work they were doing during quarantine. So my question is, did you have a quarantine comfort art that influenced you during lockdown? And if so, what was it?
Wow. I mean, truth told, I was working on Ghost Eaters during the quarantine.
Mm.
And I did not set out to write a quarantine novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily think that Ghost Eaters is a quarantine novel,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that there are certain kind of like threads,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a lot to do with the fact that like what I was imbibing, my I don't know if it's comfort reads or comfort art, but I was just reading a lot of ghost stories. Like I was just I set out to like write a ghost story, like a haunted house book. And there are
Mm-hmm.
just a million like there are so many phenomenal haunted house books. Like, so how do you write a haunted house book that sets itself aside from the the most amazing haunted house books that are out there? And like it's tough to kind of find a lane or even just like a path within that lane. Um, but I mean, I just like all the Shirley Jackson, all the
Mm.
Richard Mathesons, all the like. I mean, I wish I probably still have it somewhere buried in my office, but like just a list of like, making a kind of like compendium of like these are all the ghost stories
Mm.
that you need to read. And it perfectly fit within the kind of scope of our quarantine. Like I
Mm.
kind of emerged because frankly, all of our houses were haunted during that time. So it was very kind of apropos to
Mm.
entrench myself in this kind of reading habit. So
Mm.
I don't know if it answers the question. It wasn't like just one thing. There
Mm.
wasn't like an album that was on heavy rotation. There wasn't one kind of TV series, though we did burn through a lot of TV.
Mm.
Um, but it was, I just, I was like, I am going to read the haunted house supernatural canon.
Mm.
And I had 2+ years to do it in. And emerging from that was just kind of like, I felt like a ghost exiting our house, and I needed to read something a little bit more light
Mm.
and airy.
Mm. What is light and airy for you? What does
Oh,
that look like?
what was it? I'm. It was probably a Friday the 13th or something a little bit more kind of junk foody. Um, but yeah, I mean, like you can't read House on Haunted Hill, you can't watch House on Haunted Hill and not kind of look over your shoulder and be like, I haven't left this house in months. And going outside is like, that is like, we can't do that. Like, so it just suddenly became this kind of exercise in like almost kind of exploring the parameters of your architecture,
Mm.
your the parameters of your home.
Mm.
And it felt very ghost-like.
Mm.
But yeah, I needed a little
Interesting.
Taylor Swift after that.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Mhm.
So, that's actually a perfect segue into the next thing I wanted to ask, which is I want to talk about Ghost Eaters.
Oh.
There were a lot of things I really liked about it. I think we all knew a guy like Silas in college. And, usually we figured he was going to either, turn out to be a cult leader or a drug addict. You somehow managed to make him both.
Mhm.
But specifically, I want to talk about the POV and why you chose it and all of that, because I normally do throw a little side eye when male authors write first person female POV, just because I've seen it done badly more times than I wish I had. But I thought you did a really effective job. And I wondered if you had a process that you went through in order to get into Aaron's head, and if so, what that was.
Well, whew, I mean, thank you. I feel like I always, it's funny because like Aaron is one of these characters that you kind of like have to take her on her own terms, and like she's not necessarily a very likable character. But I feel like it's a kind of there's this intersection of her life where she's young, she's just out of like she doesn't know who she is, and like I that kind of ennui of identity and who am I and what do I want out of my life? And I don't know. I remember that as in my 20s, post grad, and I don't know, like for me, the conscious decision was never like I am writing from a female perspective, like this is like so I have to do X, Y, and Z. It was more just kind of like keeping kind of a certain level of emotional honesty. Like if I was honest to the notion of like who this character is and the challenges or the whatever she was going through, that like the emotional reaction to that came from a place of honesty, to the extent where like I kind of I can't say that I am Aaron, but I feel like a lot of me is in Aaron. That it is my own kind of personal rudderlessness of early 20s, where you know you're told maybe like for better or for worse, like I went to a college and had a circle of friends, and we all thought we were going to change the world. We thought we were going to like revolutionize the lit scene, and like watch out because here come these brash move over beats. There's a new crew in town, and that didn't necessarily happen. And the kind of humbling and kind of sobering quality of that is always like, oh, okay, you mean this experience, my experience, is multiplied by however many other people thought the exact same thing of themselves and their circle of friends, and now we're all like ejected from our undergrad collegiate environment, and we're kind of thrust into the world, and suddenly we're supposed to make sense of this and pay rent, and it yeah, I don't know why I went on that tangent, but like that is a very identifiable and understandable, and something that I could kind of connect to.
Well,
Yeah.
so in other words, if you write women like a people.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yes, yes. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny because you were talking before about not having written about Long Island and writing about all these other places. And the kind of the debate, the internal debate that I've always had with myself as a writer, going way, way back, is always, I had that teacher, and sixth grade, seventh grade, 12th grade, wherever it was, like the write what notion, that kind of mentality of like, if you're not writing about you and your personal experience, you don't have, like, you can't write about something beyond that. And I saw that line being drawn in the sand, and like I was just like, now I can't write about going to Mars, and now I can't write about being president, or now I can't write about, like, I saw all the things that I couldn't write about because I was relegated to my own personal experience. And I just wish, like, the kind of the reconfiguration of that concept of writing what like, to me it's write what you feel. And the kind of adjustment there is that, like, we all kind of share a certain common emotional language. We've all lost someone. We've all known what it is to be loved, to be afraid, basic kind of primal emotions. And if you're true to that, if you're honest to that, and you kind of imbue that honesty into your characters, and be truthful. I want to get a little more granular, like, be focused enough that it's a character who has dimension and has like details. I don't know, like that. The emotional honesty is the thing that the reader connects to, in my mind, and that's what I attempt to do. That's what I'm trying to do, struggling to do.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, certainly you have to run things by people for just accuracy and whatnot, but I do also take a much broader view of write what you know.
Yeah.
For example, when I write, I rarely do a one-to-one self-insert character. Like I can't think of any character actually that really fits that bill.
Yeah.
Um, but I do sort of take little chunks of my personality or my lived experience and put them into different characters, and that's sort of my route into the character when I'm writing.
Yeah.
So is that sort of what it is for you?
Occasionally, it's funny. I do find myself in Aaron. Uh, I do, you mentioned Whisper Down the Lane, and uh, it wasn't so much that I cast myself. Whisper Down the Lane is kind of a dual narrative of a young boy and man, and but I do find myself in kind of both, and to certain, and it's I don't know, like it makes it resonate in a way that is truthful to me and kind of feels like, oh, I've got a little more skin in the game here because I'm speaking to something that is either historical or experiential. But also nobody knows. Like the readers, there's no telling like one detail from the other. And I guess it becomes kind of a Easter egg for me and my parents.
Okay. All right. So we have a few minutes left. Um, I would love to do show and tell if you brought something.
Um, I have this book. It's a collection of poetry by this poet by the name of I.
Mm.
And this is her first. It's a compendium of her first two collections. Um, and I found this book in the ninth grade. My theater teacher in high school uh, gave me a poem from this book, like a photocopy of a poem from this book.
Mm.
And it was kind of a class assignment to kind of perform these poems to our class. And by luck of the draw, the poem that I received was from this book, and I read it, and I can't speak to the performance of it, but like the poem itself it was powerful, and it just kind of blew my mind. And I became such a fan of I's work. Like I had to find the rest of the book. I had to I think I borrowed my theater teacher's book and probably didn't give it back for a long, long time until my grade was, I under threat of failing her class if I didn't return her book. But then I got my own copy, and I is one of these amazing poets. She passed away a few years back, but her work is just it's all first person narrative, and she always takes on the persona of other characters. Like it's always from the point of view of someone other than herself. And she goes all over the place. Like I mean, like some of the poems are like JFK or Marilyn Monroe, but
Mm.
And others are like the Atlantic child killer from, gosh, what was that? When I'm blanking on whether that was the 60s, 70s, or 80s, but like in its dark stuff, it's work that like there's a certain brutality to it. And these are poems. These like a poem tends to kind of exist on a page, maybe two. And the things that she can do within the scope of just a page, a couple stanzas, I can't do within like the scope of 10, 20 pages. And I was always kind of in awe of I, because just the efficiency of her language and her command of voice, and the fact that you knew who these characters were, and that they were talking straight to you, the reader. I just love that. It made me feel like I was culpable, that I was somehow being like there was a conversation going on. It felt like theater. It felt like monologue. It felt like I couldn't hide, you know. And I just love, I. So my show and tell is Cruelty Killing Floor by I. Poems by I.
Cool. Thank you.
No, thank you.
So, usually, usually we do a speed round at the end.
Oh, okay.
So this is like a don't think too hard about it. Just
Okay.
go. Okay.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
All right. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Super salad.
Soup in my youth, salad in my older days.
Okay. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Oh, Star Trek Wrath of Khan, Part 2.
Fair enough. If you could pick one superpower, what would you pick?
Swimming underwater forever.
Awesome. Okay, if you could have the invisible jet or the Batmobile, which one?
Batmobile?
Fair enough. Venom or Carnage? I know it's not fair. I know it's not fair.
Venom. Venom.
Venom. Fair. What is the secret ingredient of your apple pie?
Love.
Love.
Chuck Wendig. That's my secret.
Chuck Wendig is your secret ingredient? Okay. Do you believe in ghosts actually?
No. But I want to. I want to.
I know. I know. If you could see and talk to ghosts, i.e. they were real, what ghost would you most want to buy a beer?
Maybe just because we were talking about I would say I.
Fair enough.
To say thank you.
What ghost would you want to kick in the supernatural nads?
Man. I can't think about it. Why do we keep thinking Thomas Jefferson? Like that was the Thomas Jefferson.
Go with it. And what ghost would you awkwardly make excuses not to hang out with?
Abraham Lincoln. I don't.
All right. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I wish we had more time.
Thank you.
Well, it was absolutely my pleasure. And by the way, I should explain. I did in fact offer you an inducement to come on the show.
Whoa!
They say circle time on them, so I'm gonna
God.
I'm gonna send you this in a little swag box.
Where did you get that? How did you get that?
I'm an artist and graphics professional, so sometimes I go a little off the chain with the swag boxes.
Oh my golly, that is amazing. I'm okay. Yes, please.
Right.
That's phenomenal.
All right, so I'll message you and we'll figure out how I can get it to you.
Oh my God. Please,
right.
please.
Okay.
Thank you.
This has been our show. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone. We have had a great time. Please check out the links in the comments to check out all of Clay's stuff that he's up to, and buy his book and pre-order What Kind of Mother, because I'm sure it's going to be as awesome as everything else I've read. Take care, you beautiful nerds. Take it easy and stay geeky.